All right, well, welcome to the Promising Practices Share. This session is all about the Leadership Excellence Credential and IEP goals. So we have 3 instructors with us today sharing how they have used that credential to connect with students and to help them meet their IEP goals. So we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Franklin. They are going to start first. And so I'm going to advance their slides. They're just going to tell me when to do it, and we'll go from there. So again, thank you, Jessica and Jennifer, for joining us today. And Mindy, we're so excited to have you with us.
All right, thank you. So I'm Jenny Dameron.
I'm Jessica Berry.
And so we have taught Lean Six Sigma this year for our Tier 3 students. So students with multiple disabilities. So we're going to kind of talk to you guys about how we implemented that. So if you want to go ahead and advance that, Melissa. All right, so I wasn't sure, if everyone was aware of what Lean Six Sigma was, but we just put on here that it's a process improvement approach utilizing teamwork to improve performance and reduce waste. For our students, they did not pass their state testing, so we are helping them earn 12-point industry credentials to replace that state testing and meet competency towards their graduation requirements. So we decided to do all 3 units with our students. We did leadership excellence first, which is worth 3 points. And then we're combining yellow belt and green belt for the remaining 6 points. All right, so throughout leadership excellence and yellow belt and green belt, these are kind of an overview of all of our teaching strategies that we've utilized. We had to modify the curriculum quite a bit and do some modifications and accommodating to help them learn different ways. So we've used lots of visuals, videos, different worksheets. We did on-hand demonstrations. A lot of our students, they have kind of difficulty coming up with different ideas and getting started. So we made sure that we were doing like conversation and activity starters. We had that ready for them. We did lots of role plays so they could get that practice. We were fortunate enough to have a few students that had worked, and we used a lot of those real world scenarios related to their experiences. We had a couple of students that had worked in pizza stores, and that was working in a pizza shop. So that helped a lot. And then we chose to combine the yellow belt and green belt curriculum for our students. We felt that was an easier way for them to learn. And then repeated practice of yellow belt and green belt tools. We did intentional grouping of students to build off of the students' strengths. So if we had a student that was kind of quiet, a little timid, we also had a student that was very vocal in that group that would kind of take that student under their wing. So, and then we facilitated the group project work at each step of the DMAC project levels. So within green belt and yellow belt, there's you define, you measure, analyze, improve, and then there's a control step. So when Jess and I went through the training, we learned all these tools ahead of time, and now we're currently working on our project. But for our students, we felt that it was easier for them to kind of come up with their project, and then at each of those levels, as we were teaching, we then had them do that step, because we felt like if we did it too far in advance, they wouldn't remember all of the steps. And then we also had a paraprofessional support for each group. So we had like a certain person assigned to each group. So along with Jess and I working with them, then that paraprofessional was also key in helping them. All right, you can go ahead and advance. All right, so to earn the Leadership Excellence credential, students had to complete what was called a Leadership Excellence Roadmap. So they established goals, they had micro improvements or ways to meet those goals. And they had to do those things to earn the Leadership Excellence Credential. So we, all of our students were on IEPs. So we had the students take their own IEP, and we had them review that, look at their transition goals and their academic goals. And then with support from teachers and paraprofessionals, we identified micro improvements, which are small changes that would help them meet their goals. So just as an example, a student had an IEP goal, given a 6th grade reading level passage, Jane will answer textually implicit comprehension questions with 85% accuracy. So that student had that reading goal. So then we also, we had the micro improvement as they will read for 10 minutes per day. And that student came up with that micro improvement for himself. So, and then a personal goal, students also came up with other goals outside of their IEPs. And one student had a goal to get a job by the end of the school year. So again, you know, we had to talk through that, like, well, what are things that you need to do to get a job by the end of the school year? So the student said, well, I need to fill out job applications. So they filled out that roadmap with all their goals and those improvements. All right, you can go ahead and advance that.
So some specific examples that we did is we utilized all the students' IEPs to complete the leadership excellence maps. We really concentrated on their strengths and weaknesses and their goals, and then used those to help with the roadmap that we did. We also talked about the 5 S's for organizational practices. So they practiced with like classroom projects. One group had to clean out the refrigerator. They utilized before and after pictures for that, so that the students could understand the concepts of the 5 S's. We also used the 5 S's kind of we did the refrigerator, and we did a closet within another classroom that they did. We utilized funny videos to demonstrate like good teamwork, bad teamwork skills, to keep the students kind of interested. I have to say that was probably one of their favorites, and we put the videos in here in case you guys want to use them. The communication concept, we used visuals to teach the concepts of filtering. We actually used coffee grounds to help demonstrate for the students like what gets filtered. So when they start talking, when they're, you know, going through their IEP, when they're just talking in general in the business world, like, do things need to be filtered just like the coffee was filtered? So we used those hands-on stuff demonstrations for them. We utilized videos for filtering as well. It was a game that we played, Think It or Say It. And this is actually a very difficult concept for most of our students. Think It or Say It paired with the coffee visual helped them understand there's a lot of things that I'm going to think, but I don't always need to say it, especially out like when they're working in the business world. And I believe some of the students, even their IEP goals are kind of related around like, should they think it or should they say it? The other thing that we really used was the POW, which is the purpose, agenda, and limit, and related it to their IEP meetings. We had a student's recent IEP meeting, and so we had the students complete a POW template based on their upcoming IEP meetings as well. And we talked a lot about the limit, and what was an acceptable limit for some of the IEP meetings. I know some IEP meetings can run up to, you know, a couple hours, and we talked about how that's probably not acceptable, and that's the reason you use the POW is to come up with the purpose, set the agenda, and then limit it on the time to keep everybody on track. We had the students use different colored highlighters And we went through and actually highlighted, like, I think we highlighted their strengths and weaknesses, like different colors, so they could see that. And then, we highlighted like their, improvements and then their micro improvements that they wanted to do. That way they could see how each one related to the other. The teachers provided options and activities for conversation starters, so the students didn't have to generate the topics and ideas on their own. We utilized Kahoots for review and to keep the students engaged. That seemed to be a big topic for the kids. They are very competitive when it comes to Kahoot. So I strongly recommend using Kahoots. We used it to do lots of vocabulary throughout the information for leadership excellence. We utilize strengths and weakness worksheet to help the students identify needs, and then they can actually help that use that when their IEP is getting written. We did role plays, so the teachers gave students roles and helped them act out. We did one for like active listening, polite listening. And that actually was probably the highlight of the class. It was funny to see the kids who would polite listen and just turn their heads so they didn't have to listen, or trying to get the attention of the person who was not listening. So that was a fun project that we did with them. And then in measure, in yellow belt, we had the students practice taking data and inputting data into Pareto charts and bar graphs. So we've done a lot of different stuff that would correlate to jobs for these students, as well as kind of like into their IEP. If you want to go to the next slide, Melissa. So we did use a lot of the slides for the leadership excellence portion. And this was one that we used. This is just an example that we used, talking about like an executive within the company, an effective leader, a competent manager, and a contributing team member. And then we kind of correlated that, Melissa, if you want to go to the next slide, to real world things. So a highly capable individual would be like somebody who works at McDonald's, makes productive contributions through talent, knowledge, skills, and good working habits. And if you want to go to the next one, we showed them like what a level 2 would be, a contributing member, like a McDonald's team member. And so everything that we tried to relate, either related to through the leadership excellence, either related to like working, going out in the real world and working, or we related it to their IEP goals to help them see how it correlates between the two. So if you want to go to the next one, I think level 3, we did a competent manager. And showed that it organizes people and has resources towards effective and efficient pursuit of predetermined goals. Level 4, if we want to go to the next one, was the store manager, and how the store manager kind of overlooks everybody. And then finally, the level 5 was the executive, and that's the person who owns that. And we talked about like a lot of people that own one McDonald's owns a couple of different McDonald's, and they're in charge of all of those buildings and all of the people that work at all of the buildings. So that's kind of how we broke that down. I think this was easier to kind of correlate to the business world instead of like the actual IEP, but that you could also correlate that to the IEP based on like the people who are in the meetings as well. So Melissa, if you want to go to the next one, this is where we talked about our listeners and the characteristics of a great leader. And if you want to go to the next slide, so we did use the slides. And here are the videos that we used, talking about teamwork, good teamwork, bad teamwork. The students really liked the teamwork videos. That was, like I said, one of the highlights, I think, of their class. And so you are more than welcome to use any of these videos that we've come up with or any of the slides. We'll be happy to share it with anybody. If you want to go on to the next one. Oh, yeah, we're going to play the videos. Is that it? Okay. So that is our last slide, but you are more than welcome, like I said, to use the videos. The last part of our presentation, we kind of have one of our students who is willing to talk. He's actually one of our leaders in our class, and so we thought it'd be a good idea for him to kind of talk about what he's learned throughout the Leadership Excellence class. And he now is working on his yellow and green belt. And so we thought he could talk a little bit about his current project that he's working on. So, Jacob, introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob. I am the team leader of our group, and it is me and 4 other students are working in our group right now. So my project we are working on is called Lunch Line Quickness, and we came up with some ideas about the lunch line quickness. One of my ideas was to have more adult supervision, like having the teachers or staff supervising the students while the students are going through the lunch line. I also picked map and signs, or like food is located and where to get your food, and basically where to get your food and where food is located, and your forks, condiments, trays, and everything is pretty much located. Our lunch line times that we did was 8:18, which I think one day we had 8 minutes and 18 seconds. Our next one was 10 minutes and 46 seconds, which I thought that was a really long time for the students to get through the lunch line. Another one of our times was 11:10, 11 minutes and 10 seconds, which that was a pretty long time for the students to get through that lunch line. And then the last one was 12 minutes and 26 seconds.
So Jacob, what did you guys measured, how long students stood in line?
Yes.
So do you remember what your goal is to reduce that time in line?
Our goal was to get at least like maybe less than 3 minutes in the lunch line.
All right. So how did you figure out what was wrong? Why was the kids standing in line so long?
Mainly because of mainly because it was unorganized. Like students like stand in line on their cell phones, which we can't really control others what they're doing. So we came up with adult supervision and pretty much mapping signs.
All right. And so what are you guys going to do this week to figure out your improvement process?
We're gonna have a meeting with our coaches and our team, and we're gonna talk with the kitchen staff and see if we can figure out a better solution to solve this problem.
And Jacob, what have you learned from this class?
Well, I've learned how to improve things. I've learned how to work in a group, and I've learned how to break problems into steps to come up with ideas or solutions.
Well, I don't know if I'll squeeze in here, but Melissa, that's kind of our presentation. So do you guys have any questions for us?
You did a great job, Jacob. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Great job, Jacob. I'm excited to
you.
hear more from your teachers about how you're going to use those steps.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question for our presenters from Franklin? Okay, well, we're going to move on then to Mindy's presentation from Marymount. So Mindy, if you want to introduce yourself, and I'll get your presentation up.
Yep. My name is Mindy Brown. I am the life skills teacher here at Marymount High School. And I focus my presentation mainly on the leadership excellence portion of the workbook, but my students are currently in their Greenbelt projects as well. I have a very low number of students, so I actually only have one group working on a project. So just keep that in mind when we do this. Within that low group, I have kind of a wide variety of skills. I have a student who is nonverbal and using an AAC device, and then I have students who are definitely verbal and will be entering into the workforce. Oh, and one that is actually already in the workforce, so he was able to bring some real world experience to the group as well. You can go ahead and advance that, Melissa. Thank you. So I broke, the workbook is broken into these three sections. The first one that we did, the first activities were all about understanding what leadership is. The second portion that we worked on together was setting the goals for ourselves. So really talking about what self-leadership looks like. That obviously relates right back to the IEP. I was lucky enough that the majority of my IEPs were at the beginning of the school year. So it really led right into the IEP process, and how they were saying, looking at the weaknesses and strengths right there in the IEP. Some of the goals that they chose for themselves were not directly in the IEP, but were definitely related in the transition section. So had a lot to do with their future independence. And then the last part that we taught was leading others and what it looks like to be a leader. You can go ahead and advance. So for understanding leadership, we did a whole lot of connecting with leaders that we have in our lives now, and then leaders that we have read about in our curriculum. So I'm trying to make it as connected to what they're doing currently in the classroom. So like connecting it to the book we were reading, connecting it to staff in our building. We created a list for reference so that they can look back on who was the leader in this situation, who was the coach, who would have been the, all the way down the line, so that they were able to process from beginning to end. And we would come back to that in different subject areas. We also did lots of hands-on. This was just one example that I had. I love the coffee filter example you all had, but we did do an exercise where they had to pass around the hula hoop and they had to pass it through each other. The first time I only told them what the end goal was. Then we reflected on who became the leader, who became the natural leader in the group. We tried it several more times, and giving each student then a chance to be the leader in the activity, and talking about how practicing it repetitively helps, because this process can and will be repetitive for them. You can go ahead, Melissa. We brainstormed a list of qualities of a good leader. If they couldn't come up with one, which oftentimes our students have a hard time coming up with ideas independently, so we would do sentence starters or things like that, but we could also always come back to our hands-on examples of someone they had named before, or reflect on our hula hoop game to kind of help them come up with these more independently. And then we created a poster in our room with the qualities of a good leader that we could continue to reference throughout the school year. Go ahead. Thank you. So the next step was teaching them how to set personal goals. The prompt that I gave them was, what would you like to be able to do more independently at home or in the community? So we started with the same prompt for everyone. The students then worked with multiple team members in multiple settings. The IS, the OT, speech teachers, the physical therapist, parents all had input, if needed, on what would be good goals for them at home or in the community. And this is where it ties directly into that IEP transition plan. All of the goals that they chose were either related to that or IEP goals that are life skill related. You can go ahead. So the first step that we did was to develop the overall mission. Everyone had the same mission, and that was to increase their independence. So starting from there, each student had to come up with 3 goals, and independently as possible, that had to do with making them more independent at home and in the community. So then the teachers worked with them to find ways to make these goals measurable, because that was the hardest part for them, is that measuring step and understanding, yes, I have this goal, but how are we going to measure that I make improvement on it? So for example, we had one student who said, I want to use my bank card independently. Okay. So we helped them figure out that how to set the goal so that we could measure it. We decided that using it 3 times a week was plausible for that student. And how are we going to track that? We can track it using their bank account app on their phone. And so we would teach them different tools to make it measurable. And then they became more independent with understanding how to measure a goal. You can go ahead. The next step in that leadership, teaching them self-leadership, was looking at each goal individually. And then so they would take the goal and they would list specific strengths and weaknesses within just that goal. So, for instance, we had a student who her goal is to learn to make and pack her own lunch. So she told us she doesn't know how to make her sandwich. She couldn't reach the snacks. She can't, cut up the fruit. So then those were her weaknesses, or things that we needed to figure out. And then her strengths, what things can she do well? She can put the items in the bag well. And so it looked very different for each student depending on their level. Step 4, we were then focusing on what we called the weaknesses, and we would set 3 to 4 micro improvements for each goal. So I would have them look at the goal and then what steps will make you more independent with that goal. So going back to the bank account, the student with the bank account, he actually didn't even have a bank account when we started the goal. So the first step, the first micro improvement, was going to go to the bank and get his account set up. The second step then was using it regularly and practicing in the community. So when we would go out on our community outings, we had opportunities to practice these goals. When we were doing life skill work in the kitchen, we were practicing a lot of these goals because so many of them were related to what we are already doing in the classroom. But oftentimes that goal was not being practiced at home. So what we found this was really helpful with was bridging that gap between home and school in order to make independence happen, not just in this structured environment. So we were looking at those steps to create goals and micro improvements that would eventually get them to be fully independent with that goal. Go ahead, you can switch. So when we talked about leading others, when we got into that third section, things that we did to practice our communication skills, we had the students email the parents, and as part of the project, they had to set up quarterly meetings with their parents to review their 3 goals and to get updates on their goal progression, because so many of these were goals that, yes, we were practicing at school, but we want you to be doing at home as well. So then we also got parent buy-in by doing that, and the parents were more motivated to follow through, since they were kind of being held accountable quarterly for also checking in and reporting how their child was doing. It allowed them to practice explaining their goals, not only to their parents, but beforehand, we would let them practice with their peers. Also practicing that active listening. We did a ton of role play throughout this whole thing. Whether it was student to student or teacher and teacher, student and teacher. I mean, we would mix it up and level it how we needed to. Practicing giving positive feedback to each other about goals, and then role play parent meetings to practice being the leader in the meeting. This actually was also a part of, which later became a part of my own personal Greenbelt project, because my project was, or is, student-led IEPs and increasing the amount of time students are sharing their IEP information during the team meeting. So this also gave them that practice to share information regularly with their parents and team members. So there were meetings where other team members were invited as well. So during the quarterly meetings, we have students practicing their speaking skills, sharing their goals with their parents. Students using AAC devices have typed out and then shared using voice dictation. We practice giving corrective feedback and a lot of times accepting that corrective feedback, what that looks like through role play. You can go ahead and switch. So having students track their own progress with their goals, we found a way to record the progress with each individual goal in order to visually show progress, sorry, I'm missing a word there, or lack thereof at each quarterly meeting. So basically, the student was having to track how well they were doing with that goal at school or at home. And then during the meeting, we would share that information with the parent. Oftentimes, they were similar and what the parent's feedback was compared to the student, but there were times where the parent was seeing a different amount of progress at home than we were at school. And so it was allowing the parents to say, okay, like kind of step up, like what are you using at school that's different than home and how can we bridge that gap? So that's what I have found most useful with the leadership excellence, again, is that bridging between home and school to really teach them how to become more self-independent and sufficient. You can turn. So I attached some materials here that I used. I didn't put everything in here, just things that I found most useful. There are different hula hoop game ideas at different levels for that initial kicking off of leadership. I took the template that, I don't know if I can click on that, but I took the template. Can I click on those, Melissa? Or do you have to? To the template one. So the template that was given to us was a little bit difficult for the students to understand. So I rewrote it and broke it up and made it so that they could type in each of their things, each of their goals, and then how they would analyze them. They would type in their strengths and weaknesses. And then here's where we listed their micro improvements and which goal we were linking them to. And this is the sheet that we referred back to in every meeting. And this is where we would record our data for how well they were meeting the goal. So that was kind of our roadmap. It's the same roadmap that we're given in the training, but I just kind of made it a little bit more understandable for the kids, and the format is much easier to follow. And then I put several student examples in here so that you could just see what a student, you can choose any of them, Melissa would be fine, what it kind of looked like for them. So for this student, their measurable goals were they wanted to get ready for school by themselves. They wanted to be able to wash dishes independently and do laundry by themselves. So we went through each one of those and what are your strengths in that area? And that's where they came up with this list. What are your weaknesses in those areas? And then how can we use those to create these micro improvements and how can we link them? So for instance, for this student, matching clothing to get dressed was an issue. So we came up with a color chart that she could use at home to help. Matching, that's where the matching the cheat sheet came in. Her parents helped work with her on creating kind of drawers that matched. And then we had a cheat sheet that she could use to help. Setting her alarm to bring her phone to school. She's always forgetting her phone, which is usually the opposite of most students, but when we're in the community, we're encouraging them to use them, and if she wouldn't have it oftentimes. So what could we do to help her remember that? And she came up with these micro improvements on her own. And then following a checklist and reporting when things are completed. So she developed a full checklist for her morning routine and can now report back to mom when she is done so that she can be sure that she didn't miss anything in her routine. So it also created this like other projects kind of spun off of this for the students to work on For instance, creating that sequencing. Sequencing is one of her goals. So right there, she was able to connect a real life skill with the skill of sequencing. And yeah, I mean, you can see the other things about doing laundry and doing her own clothing, but she's kind of a middle student. There are students who are a little bit higher than her, and there are students who are lower than her that did this same process. And it's been successful for all of them. I do recommend I think for me, seeing the examples was most helpful in this process and how to teach it. Because teaching kids with these complex needs can be really tricky when you're trying to figure out ways to modify such high level information to meet their needs in the classroom. But that's it, I think. Is that all I have? Oh, no, sorry, just kidding. So what I would do differently, I really reflected afterwards. The tracking of each goal was just not clear to me with using the yellow, green, and red. I didn't feel like it was like a solid way. It was more like a guess, like, oh, I'm kind of doing all right, so we'll give it a yellow. It just didn't feel measurable. So when I do this again, I will definitely make sure that we find a different means of tracking that goes along with the template. I'm planning on doing the goal setting every year with my students, whether I'm doing this leadership project or not. It's really, I've seen the bridging the gap work really well. And the students are feeling much more empowered to lead meetings, not just their IEP meetings, but leading more in general, in classroom activities. They're taking a lot of pride in the progress that they're making with their life skill goals, because they are feeling more independent. So next year, when we do this again, they'll be able to look at those goals and create, higher level goals for their transitions. I think I have a couple more. Maybe not. Is that it?
That's it.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
I really like both examples you guys shared today. You used that same tool, but totally different ways. And that's what I wanted our listeners and audience members to understand, is that Credential really can be tweaked or used in creative ways. And every student needs to have some leadership skills. So using it the way you two, or the three of you have, has been so fun to watch. And I'm excited, like Mindy, with your students, when they're not with you anymore, their parents now understand those micro improvements too. So teaching them a new skill or moving them to another level, they can incorporate those micro improvements at home. And then Jen and Jess, just seeing with Jacob how excited he was. I know the material can be a little dry, but when you put it into realistic life experiences for the kids, then they own it and they love it. They really enjoy it. And he was able to rattle off, all the steps, breaking things down. And so that, to me, that's just wonderful that it's worked really well. I do want all the audience members to know too that this is one of those credentials where the department says there are multiple providers. So last year we just experimented with a provider called Maximum Potential, but there are other providers for Yellow Belt, Green Belt, and Leadership Excellence in the state, and more than likely in your own community. So please double check or reach out to vendors in your own area if that's something you're interested in doing. So if you all don't have any questions, we'll go ahead and end the recording. And then if you want, we'll hang out here for just a couple more minutes to see if anybody has anything. The presentations are linked on the Google site, so you can grab those, and the recording will be up later this week. And if you are going back to another session, which I hope you are, these are, this is a way to get your feedback for today's session, this session, and your certificate. of attendance for the session. We apologize that you have to fill it out more than once, but that way we know who's attended each session. And then again, here's the Google site that you can grab your information from. I would suggest refreshing your Google site when you go back to it because we've been adding things throughout the day. So thank you so much for joining us.